Hey, what's up, mediums? It's December 19th, 2016. Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. I am Josh Hayes here with my co-host Scott Moon, and today we are talking with science fiction author Jay Allan. Jay is the author of the Crimson World series and the Far Star trilogy. Jay, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Yes, and in true Keystroke Medium fashion, we could not have started the show without at least 20 minutes worth of technical difficulties and road bumps on the way to progress, but we did succeed and triumph, and now we are live.
I have to give the internet credit because, you know, I would think the creativity of the internet and throwing something new at us every single time is, you know, pretty impressive. You know, I thought it was just a machine or a series of programs, but it actually has a malevolent intellect that is working against us, I'm sure. So,
I think there's a book there, honestly.
yeah,
Yes.
see, we're on our way right here.
The Skynet, the Skynet of Keystroke Medium.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, can we get us started, Jay, with telling our viewers and listeners just a little bit about yourself and how you got into being a writer?
Yeah, sure. I think I have probably a pretty unique bio as most of my peers go. I was actually, well, I'm an electrical engineer by education, but I never did that. I was a real estate developer, which my dad was, and I just got burnt out on it, so I retired early, and I really just I'm used to being very active and going all day long, and I didn't like having nothing to do, so I said, you know, I'm gonna sit and see if I can write a book. I'd always done a lot of writing, business writing and things like that when I was, you know, running my company. So I've been a sci-fi fan my whole life. So I said, why don't I try writing a book? And I did. And I was prowling around on some of the internet sites, you know, K-boards and some of those things. All these indie authors were talking about what they were doing. This is 2012, by the way, for a little bit.
Okay.
And I'm looking at what they're doing. I'm saying, why don't I give it a try? You know, I mean, I wasn't thinking in terms of making a living at it because I really didn't need to, but I just you know, I wanted to try to do something, so I did it, and I published my first book, Marines, which is really pretty hardcore military sci-fi. I'd read a lot of stuff, you know, David Drake, Hammer Slammers, that kind of thing, and then I put it up, and I don't know, I sold 2-3 a day for like a week and a half, and then all of a sudden it just started shooting up. And I sold like 30 a day, 50 a day, 100 a day, and it went right up to, you know, pretty much to the top of the sci-fi charts. And I don't know to this day what happened. I looked all over the internet for someone who maybe read it and wrote a review that a lot of people read or did something, but I have no idea, you know, what made that go like that. But you know, that's how I got started. And then you know, I wanted to be successful at it, so I'm reading everything, and all I read from anybody was, get the next book out quickly. Get the next book out quickly. So all I did was sit in a chair, and I cranked out the second book in about 5 weeks in the series, and I released that. And that was just like throwing gas on the fire. I mean, both books were selling like crazy, and that's how I got started. So, you know, it was a whole new world. I had not really known anything about indie publishing, you know, or much about publishing at all, really. So, it was an interesting experience getting started. I mean, cool. Back then there was less competition. 2000. I mean, I know some people started earlier than me and have even more of this story to tell. But in 2012, 2013, you know, it was less difficult than it is now, I think, to get some attention.
I read that actually around 2012. I remember it going up the charts, and I had thought that you're probably some sort of military commander or something that shared it with his unit, and everybody was getting on board. He had like a big built-in. I can't remember what I was thinking then, but I remember reading it. It's because it's pretty detailed. It's pretty detailed.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's a hardcore military thing. You know, the troop movements and stuff it seems like somebody who's either read a lot in the genre or is familiar with that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's more I get lots of emails. I always have. I'm pretty sure I have a lot of veterans and active duty military among my readers.
Right.
I get tons of email. You know, absolutely sure that I'm I'm a veteran or something. But the truth is, I'm not. I've read a lot of history. I'm also a history buff, so I've read a lot of history. I've read a lot of military history, plus a lot of sci-fi, and I do like military sci-fi and space opera a lot, so I read a lot of it, or I have over my lifetime read a lot of it.
It's kind of
and I'm a detail-oriented person by nature, so, you know, I try to make the details. I shoot for spot with my science in these things where I'm, close to accurate, but I'm not obsessed about it to the point of ruining the story over it.
Right.
I'd say there's a couple mulligans. If you play golf, it's like take a shot over again. A couple things you ignore in sci-fi. Faster than light travel is one of the big ones. I mean, there's not a lot of real science behind my faster than light travel system in those books, but I needed it for the story. But otherwise, I try to stay on, a path that's relatively reasonable, on at least on the hardcore military sci-fi books. Things like The Far Stars are a little bit more pure space opera, and that's a little bit different. But I try to adhere to what I'm doing. I like things to make sense. I like stories to make sense as a reader. So as an author, I just tried to carry over, what I like.
So you started out doing this the Space Marine books. Is that the Crimson Worlds?
Yeah, the Crimson
stories?
Worlds is my first series.
And then obviously, I mean, you've got, I can't even count, more than 30.
Well, some of those are collections. I have 26 total books.
Okay, 26.
Like I was saying to you before, I'm very used to working a long day and very active, and I'm very like that. So I write books pretty quickly most of the time. I mean, if I go into a book with a really good idea of what I want to do with it and some decent notes, I'm not much of an outliner. I'm definitely much more of a by the seat of my pants kind of a writer.
Talk about that. And in the second half of the show, we go into, I'd be really curious about the actual methods of writing and whatnot.
But I'm pretty quick and I can write books very quickly. And I think that's been a big part of my success. I know other authors have asked me, for advice and what I can tell them. And if you go on any of the Facebook groups where authors gather and everything, you'll see people and they get into these fights over, well, I can't write that quickly. But it doesn't change the fact that that's a big help if you want to succeed.
Right.
Yeah.
Getting as much out there. People don't like to wait a year or 2 years for the next book and something, and half of them forget about it.
Yeah, they'll move on to the next thing by then, and then they may be in somebody else's 12-book series and may not be able to come back right away.
It's just, it's all about discoverability, and obviously it's easier to find someone who's already found you, but that doesn't mean they're spending every single day prowling around Amazon trying to find your next book.
Right.
It'd be nice if they did. Right.
Yeah, it would be very nice. So let's talk about how you so you started indie and now you're hybrid because you're with HarperCollins, right?
That's correct. Yeah. I started with indie just because I was really trying to fill my time and do something I thought would be interesting, and that just was the easy way to do it. And I published a bunch of books indie. I don't remember exactly how many it was before I started working with Harper too, but I came to a point where I was, why don't I see what's like a next step? I mean, at this point, I wanted to see if I could expand my readership. And, of course, the curse of most indie writers is you don't move a lot in print. And you figure there's a whole bunch of people out there who go to the bookstore and buy a print book still. So, I thought, why don't I reach out and see what's what? And I picked up an agent along the way to do my foreign deals. I have, some my books been published in Japan, a couple places. So
very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, I already had him. I said, well, why don't we, reach out? And it's funny because I was actually thinking about reaching out to Amazon Publishing at that time too. And the editor who was at Amazon Publishing, I approached him through my agent and just said, would you be interested in looking at a new series I want to do? And he was, but then he left and he went to Harper Voyager. So when I finally had the proposal together for the agent and I sent it to him, the editor wanted to see it. So I sent it to him as well. And we just clicked. We got along really well. He was great to work with. So that's kind of why I did the second series with them, which is the first book coming out in March.
The first series you wrote is The Far Stars.
Right. There's 3 books in that. It's a trilogy.
Yeah.
And then what's great about being a hybrid is after that was done, I had already moved on to the next series with them. But I wrote a prequel for the Far Stars trilogy called Black Hawk, and that I self-published, which was great because it did really nice. It sold very well. People liked it, got good reviews, and it fed a lot of people into the Far Stars series. I think that's what a lot of authors don't realize. I think a lot of authors get focused on being only indie or being only traditionally published. And I think, if you mix the two together, carefully, it can make sense. I mean, I got HarperCollins paid in advance, which is a different kind of a payment structure than indie. Indie, you're getting it as it sells, but you're getting it much more quickly. The Far Stars books, it was a little different, but also working in the editorial environment that a big publisher has was also different. I have a freelance editor I work with, a couple actually, and I have proofreaders and everything that obviously that I send my books to, but it was definitely a warmer cocoon kind of a feeling there. There were more people working on the book and endless series of proofreading and, double checking this and double checking that. And it was, I think, a kind of thing that you don't really match when you're indie. So it was a good experience, and good enough that I sold another series to them right away after that. And they were happy enough with it that they were anxious to take it. So, it was a good situation, but I would never go entirely traditional publishing because it's just too easy to get my indie books out quickly, and that's what a lot of my readers want. They like the fact that I can finish a book, and I'm very frenetic. So people I work with and tend to collect in my team are like that too. So my editors and my proofreaders, they all work very quickly for me, which makes us work as a team.
Yeah, that's good.
I get a book out pretty quickly, which is nice. I just started a new series with a book called Duel in the Dark in November, and I'm going to have the second book out in January.
I'm reading that book right now, The Duel in the Dark. Love the cover, by the way.
Yeah, that's an artist called Tom Edwards. I mean, you see his work pretty much plastered all over Amazon now. He's really talented guy, and definitely made huge inroads into the indie science fiction market as far as selling his covers.
We had Tom on the show a little bit ago to talk about his book covers, and he talked about his whole process. It's pretty impressive. I was amazed at how productive he is with all those.
Yeah, he's good. He's great to work with too. I mean, he's a good guy. So I'm really happy that I found him. He's very, very busy and backed up now. So he's a little harder to work with because of that. But I've been working with him for a little while now. So
I tell you, his covers are good, but I really, really enjoy your Far Star covers. I love artwork like that. Like Scalzi's got a book out coming next year, I think, that has really cool painted artwork in kind of a conceptual fashion, and I like Funeral Games. I really like your Shadow of Empire cover. Yeah. Very kind of not retro, but in the same kind of vein as back in the 70s where they were painting their covers, and that's very cool. I like that.
Yeah, what happened with that was when I was working with Harper and we got to the point of dealing with the cover. It's all one big piece of artwork that the three covers go together, and they made a poster out of it with all three, and then they sliced it into three pieces to do the three covers. But the artist's name is Mark Simonetti, and they go to me, they say, we have this artist, his name's Mark Simonetti. He did some of the work on the Game of Thrones books, and we're wondering if you'd have thought that was a good choice. I'm like, okay. I have no idea what they spent on those covers, but I have to imagine they made a pretty good investment in them.
Yeah.
And I was really happy with them too. They're different. And sometimes you look at the covers and it's the same and the same and the same, and I thought that was a different look, and it was interesting, and it tied the three books together. So I don't know if it made any difference sitting on a shelf in a bookstore. But I thought they came out well. I was very happy with them.
Those are the type of conversations as a writer you gotta sit up daydreaming about having, talking about the book covers from George R. Martin's and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I know. I was pretty impressed. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fine with me.
Yeah.
So
make that happen.
So
I was going to say, I was listening to, I think Sean Coyne's podcast the other day, and they were talking about being a hybrid and how sometimes traditional public can put restrictions on what you can do to promote. Have you had any problems with that, or you just pretty much do what you want to do as far as publishing other stuff or doing promotion?
No, I can't speak, for the publishing universe and bad experiences other authors have had, but I mean, Voyager's been good to me in terms of my contracts and the provisions. I mean, I have really no non-compete. I mean, it's almost minuscule, and it really only applies to things that would be directly related to the books they're publishing. So, that kind of thing that have given a lot of authors problems. And certainly, people I deal with at Voyager have been very supportive in that way, and they understand. I think they understand that, part of what drives sales for them of my books is the people that buy my indie books. So,
right.
Weakening me in that area would only weaken me for what they're selling as well. And they've been pretty good in dealing with that and realizing that. And even even when I did Black Hawk, I knew I just sold them 3 new books. I mean, there's a limit to how many books they're going to do from one author in a short period of time. But I wanted to do Black Hawk because I knew it would drive more sales. The Far Stars books had their initial burst, and they were, not fading, but, settling back in the way books do.
Yeah.
And I knew from my own experiences that if I did a related book, it would drive sales to all those books. So, but they had an option, first read refusal on any Far Stars books that I might do after the original trilogy. So I went to them and I explained what I wanted to do, and they were very supportive about that as well. And I think it works well for both parties because I got a big I sold a bunch of the Far Stars books, as well as Black Hawk selling very well too. So, it worked very well for me, and it worked well for them. And I think, as the industry progresses, I think the people that are going to prosper on both sides, both publishers and authors, are the ones who recognize that and find ways to work together. That I did an indie book, that I did very well on financially and sold a lot of copies, but it also was pushing my book with them and improving my relationship with them.
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
Getting that out there. So I think that's the way authors, who might be listening, I think just think that way. I come from a business background, so I'm used to thinking that way. I think a lot of authors, especially ones who maybe worked with publishers in the past or wanted to and got, had trouble getting their books recognized, they have a lot of bitterness. And I'm not saying it's not warranted, but I don't think it's helping them get their careers maximized either.
Right. Well, I mean, it works both ways, like you said, because it's good for you that you can get into different markets, but it's good for them because it's basically free publicity for them. Like every time you push an indie book, it's free publicity for the publisher because they're going to see Jay Allan and go buy your other books too if they like the indie published books. So I wouldn't see why you wouldn't want to do that. That's
right. And I'm sure there are people in the publishing industry who, people don't change easily sometimes, and they look back to a different time and they have certain preconceived notions on things. But like I said, my editor, he worked at Amazon Publishing, so he was well versed in the in the whole notion of the newer outlook on publishing as well. So it was good. It was a nice combination for me. I'm not saying everybody would have a good experience at every publisher, but I have no complaints whatsoever about my experiences. So
we've actually had 2 guests on the show now that have been published by HarperCollins Voyager. One has had a very good experience. One has had a very negative experience. So it's interesting to see. But I think overall, when it comes to traditional or hybrid publishing or indie publishing, that science fiction tends to be the category where you're going to get more. Hey, Scott, your heater's coming through again. You're going to get more work. They're going to work with you more than like a romance genre. You're not going to have a in my experience and talking with people, it doesn't seem like there's a great market or a great ability to do hybrids in other genres. Like for literary fiction, there's almost no crossover at all. But with science fiction, you see a lot of crossover with that. Yeah,
I mean, science fiction is also very, very strong indie publishing. I mean, I have a lot of my peers that I've worked with on different things, and marketing. Sometimes we exchange emails and things like that. And there's some good people out there writing some really good stuff, indie. And I think the sci-fi market has been one that's been willing to read, go to ebooks and support that. But of course, there are people who prefer to buy a print book, and they can buy all mine in print, but it just doesn't get a lot of exposure like the ebooks do. So, I think it's if I was, if somebody was asking me, are you going to make as much money, working with a publisher, my answer has to be like a definite maybe. I mean, you might not. I wasn't that concerned about, getting out my slide ruler or something, figuring out to the penny, because I thought the experience would be good, and I just felt in a vague sort of not very specific way that it was just good for my career to have a foot in both camps.
Absolutely.
And and I think that's something that people should think about. You can't figure out and real estate taught me that you can't figure out what's going to happen in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, or whatever. And extrapolating exactly the condition right now forward is not a recipe for success in my experience.
Right.
I mean, publishers aren't going to vanish. and that's a good world to be in. And they got me things that I couldn't get on my own. I presented at Comic-Con 2 years in a row.
That is very cool.
You know, in New York, I live in New York, so it's easy for me. And Shadow Empire got reviewed on io9.com, and
Oh yeah, very cool.
gave it a good review. But I got like 1,000 extra sales that day. You know, and that's something that most indies aren't going to be able to get. You know, I kind of wish the publishers would realize the things like that they can do, and maybe be more aggressive about marketing, and maybe they'll move in that direction now that the market's changed. But you know, but I can recognize that there were a lot of things that I would not have gotten, you know, on my own. And then there are strengths that I get when I do an indie book too. So I think the combination is good for me. Works for me because I write very quickly. If you can only write one book a year, I don't know that I would, you know, take a whole year and not publish an indie book and give it to a publisher. But
right.
I think if you're writing that slow, you're going to have a much harder time as an indie publisher too. It's just the way it is.
I'm curious to know on the ebook side of your business, do you see the same number or generally the same number between your traditional and your indie published books as like units sold? Like say, I don't know, daily or weekly or monthly, do you see the same, or do you see more paperbacks coming from your traditional, or?
Well, more paperbacks for sure, because, you know, they had them in bookstores. I mean, and I sold thousands of paperbacks, which I don't normally do. I probably normally sell, you know, in the first 6 months of book is that maybe if I sell 500 paperbacks, that's a lot.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe compared to, you know, 30 or 40 or 50 times that number of ebooks. I'm probably 50 to 1 on ebook to print on an indie title. And with Harper, I still sold more ebooks because, you know, the market I brought to them was all ebooks. So, but, you know, we sold thousands of books in stores too, which was a new market for me. I'm sure a lot of people picked up a book in a Barnes and Noble who'd never heard of me before. And that's a big part of the reason I did the deal.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of diversify and get out there into some new readerships.
Yeah. You know, if I pick up, so what's a fan? If I pick up, you know, 1,000 new fans that never heard of me before and really enjoy the books, and then they go find I have all these other books, and by the way, they can get them in print too. So I thought that made sense. You know, it's hard to track exactly where sales come from.
Yeah.
You know, but I think it did me good, and I was willing to do it again, and I'm sure I would do it again in the future. I would say I would never go where the majority of my releases were in indie, unless things change dramatically in the market.
Right.
But it's gotten harder too. I mean, it's much harder to get noticed. I'm very lucky that I had a little bit of a presence. You know, in 2013 was a great year. I mean, all I had to do was throw a book up and, you know, and make no effort to market it, and you know, it was good. And you got more promotion from Amazon than I think most books did. I think there was less out there, and now you got 3-4 more years of not only of more people coming into the market, but the people that were in it with me, myself included. We've gotten better. My newer books, I think, are better books than my older books. My newer covers are certainly better than the covers I had back then. Right. You know, and it's just part of that whole progression. It gets more difficult. So, you know, I think there was a window where it was, I don't want to say it was easy, but where it was relatively, you know, an opportunity for people to, I don't know if someone starting today would have the same opportunity. I mean, they could. Obviously, people always break out.
Right.
But I think, you know, it's moving back toward almost like it was before, where it's very hard to break in and get that attention. I mean, if you want to spend thousands of dollars on marketing, you might be able to force your way in. But for someone just throwing up a book, I would think it's a lot harder today. I don't really know because, you know, obviously I'm not in that position.
I would say that it would be harder for two reasons. One, people like yourself who've been doing it for a number of years have the fan base and the numbers to be able to push your books into the algorithms faster and easier than a new author. And number two, back when you could do a free promotion and it would bounce up the charts, and then when it would go back paid, it would stay up there. When they changed that I think hampered a lot of people too. So it's,
as far as new people,
absolutely. But I think, I mean, I think you could still do it. I mean, we're still selling books. People we know that are coming into the industry are still selling books. But I think instead of where you write something and then slap a cover on it and proofread it one time and slap it up there and it jumps up the charts, you can't do that anymore. People are becoming really wise, and they're becoming very solid e-readers in the fact that they can go and look and see their preview and go, that book, I don't like that book. It doesn't look very good. I'm going to go on to the next one. So quality instead of quantity now, I think is something that you're really going to have to look at if you want to do this as a career and not just trying to slap up as many books as you can.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, like I said, my own stuff is certainly better. I've since had some covers redone and some books re-edited and things like that. But that's what I did. The first book, I wrote it, I proofread it myself, and I did the cover myself. And
Right.
And I've used a little bit of graphics. I have all the Adobe tools, and I've used them before, so I had a little bit of a leg up on some people. But the first cover I put up, I think in today's market, it wouldn't. It wasn't terrible, but it wouldn't. It's not Tom Edwards' cover. Let's put it that way.
Right. Right.
And I think that would hurt today in a way that it didn't then.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people, I mean, I've seen them up there where people will look at, when they design their covers, they'll look at what's already been done on Amazon, and they'll just make more covers like before. And if they have enough of a newsletter, or they got some sort of giant Facebook group they're part of, or somebody that, maybe they're big into online gaming and they know thousands of people, they'll still kind of get that first, your first 1,000 fans or your 1,000 true fans. There's that principle in marketing.
Right.
You get 1,000 people to get on it pretty quick, you can move some books. But I do think in general, a good book cover is extremely important, as well as some good copywriting for your book description, and then the quality of the book also. Kind of the three-way.
It's a trifecta.
Yeah, like you said, anybody who has a following of some kind to bring to it is, that's been in books, for as long as there have been books. I mean, if you're a TV personality and you write a book, it goes to the top of the bestseller list because you have a way to promote it. So yeah, if someone has a large affinity group of some kind from something else, then they certainly have an opportunity. But like I certainly didn't. As a matter of fact, I one of the things I read on one of the message boards was start a mailing list. So I started a mailing list. Not when I first released the first book, but a few weeks later. And by the time I released the second book, I think I had 20 names on it, and 14 or 18 of them clicked through. So it was, I wish I had those percentages today. Unfortunately, bigger lists don't behave that way. But
yeah, my first year on the mailing list, I had 4 people on the list. 2 of them were me, and one of them was my mom. And I don't know.
But I would say, again, for authors, I mean, that's got to be the one thing you do because it's so easy and effortless. I have to say, I've been less aggressive on email most of the time I've been publishing, just like I've been less aggressive on marketing. I was spoiled. I was lazy when I started. One, I wasn't, I was doing it as kind of a second career, so I was in a little different situation than some people. And I started at such a good time, and I got so fortunate, and believe me, I know it's luck, but I got a lot of exposure early. And then of course back then when you were selling books, I mean, that was before there was KU and a lot of exclusivity, and Amazon promoted very heavily my stuff in those days. So like 2013, there were a couple times when I had maybe 6 books at the top 10 military sci-fi books. I mean, old books hung around longer then. Right. That's what I think makes it hard right now. You put out book 1, then you put out book 2, then you put out book 3, but book 1 is sunk into oblivion, and that's where you need to get new people in. And I think that's what would make it hard for someone to get started. When I was doing this, really, really growing in 2013, I put out book 4 in a series. Books 3, 2, and 1 were both all in the top 20 on that first page of the results. So that helped me get new people in as I go. I think that's a far greater challenge for authors who don't have exposure to start with.
Well, that'd be some excellent social proof. If you look at a book and you notice that the rest of the series is also ranked high, then that tells people, hey, these are all good. Whereas now, like I said, it's harder to get multiple books in that first page on Amazon.
It's just harder because there's more competition, and also because of the way I think Amazon does things now is a little bit different. But it's just, there's a lot of good stuff out there, and back then there was less of that. There were obviously good authors then and good books, but the market's gotten tougher. It's gotten more competitive. The people who succeeded have gotten better. I mean, like I said, I think my books are better now than they were then, and I think most of the guys I know, I'm fortunate enough to know probably some of the people you've interviewed. I have we've gotten to know each other a little bit, and some of those guys do some really good work and good covers, and it's as good as anything publishers put out. And that wasn't the case probably 4 or 5 years ago, as much as indie authors get mad when you say that. I mean, you know, we've broken into a market and we've come a long way, but I mean, you know, it's harder now in some ways. In some ways, it's good. I mean, it's a good market. I don't sell any fewer books than I used to, certainly, but and probably I sell more, but it's much harder to rank today to get into the top 100 than it was then.
Right.
You know, all I had to do back then was release a book. I never did marketing for 3 years. I didn't do any marketing except an occasional BookBub ad or something like that. But you know, now you really have to market.
What do you do for marketing now?
Well, I have my email list. I do a lot of cooperative emailings with some of the other, you know, other authors in my genre. So we, you know, whereas I'll send out their new releases to my list, and they'll send out their new releases. I'm also part of a group called Discover Sci-Fi. 10 of us, we built a big mailing list, and we mail jointly to that list as well. So email's got to be always at the top. And then there's BookBub, and now BookBub has the other ads at the bottom, the paid ads, which, you know, have less ROI, but you can get them anytime you want. So that's a, you know, difference.
Oh, I didn't know BookBub had paid ads.
Yeah, they have obviously the paid features, but now they have pay-per-click ads that they have at the on the emails. And so if you can't get a BookBub for a book you want, their normal ad, you can buy those pay-per-clicks. They're more expensive for the results you get, but you can still drive a lot of people with them.
Right.
And that's the thing. And it's also where I sympathize with people trying to get started today. I have enough sales that I can spend money on marketing, and I'm not making what I spend back on marketing. You know, I'm not, if I put $1,000 into those BookBub ads, I'm probably not making $1,000 back. But I'm driving a lot of people when I release on top of the people who would have bought anyway, and I'm getting my rank. So instead of maybe a new release for me rank, like Duel in the Dark, I mean, my releases these days probably would have been like 150 or so, would have topped out at. And Duel in the Dark went to 60 because I put some marketing behind it. So that's a big difference in exposure. I was in the top 100 for 4 or 5 days. And that's pretty, you know, the top range for me is like that top half of the top 100, or the, you know, bottom half, I guess, of the top 100. You know, I rarely, except for once or twice when I had very successful, you know, BookBub ads in the past. Top 50 is generally a reach for me, you know, on a new release. So I'm generally likely to get between, say, 50 and 100. But if I don't put any marketing behind it these days, you know, then I'll fall short of that maybe and be in the top. It's still okay. And normally, unless I blundered into releasing at the same time as a couple of my peers did, I'll go to the number one, you know, hot new releases and number one, number two in the genre. So that's good exposure. I think that's important. I sympathize with someone getting started because they don't have that going in. The ads really don't give you ROI. What the advantage of them is to push you to the highest level of exposure. But if you're just starting, you know, you're going to pay for these ads. You're not going to get great ROI, and you're going to push yourself from, you know, 50,000 to 10,000, and that's not going to really do the same thing for you as pushing yourself from, you know, 500 to 50.
It's hard for new writers to explain to their spouse or significant other or whoever this, this money's all for exposure. And they're like, yeah, but we need to eat.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it depends, right. And like any business, I think a lot of authors, they don't approach it like a business. And I understand that because most of them haven't run a business. You know, I had that advantage of thinking that way. So to me, it's the naturalist thing in the world to invest a little money into pushing, you know, building up my fan base and everything like that. But that's a hard thing for someone, you know, who may be scraping up the money and it's money they're going to miss. And do I spend, you know, $5,000 or $10,000 on promotion and marketing for a book and with no idea of what it's going to see? Me, I know I'm going to sell a certain number, so it's easier for me. I might give away some of what I made if the marketing doesn't produce, but it's not quite the same thing. I appreciate that, and I sympathize with people facing that. But you know, it's like success in any area is usually difficult. It wasn't difficult for me in this, and I recognize that was a lot of good fortune and a lot of good timing, which was totally accidental, of course. But you know, I don't, you know, I think
timing's good. If you can get the timing, then.
Well, I was mid-August 2012, which was, I think, even maybe a year earlier would have been even better. But I mean, I was definitely on time to catch the period of time where you could build a little bit of a name without too much effort and investment. So I'm grateful for that I did it when I did. But you know, I sympathize with people who don't have that.
So you're a full-time writer now. How long after you started writing did it take you to become a full-time writer?
Well, remember, I was retired. I retired and sold my real
that's
estate
right,
business
retired.
about a year before. So I've basically been full time in the sense of really working a full time number of hours at it. Probably the last 2
Right.
years. At first, I was doing it part time, but I wasn't doing anything else part time. I was just my commitment was, let's say, half hearted. I mean, because I was just doing it for something to do, and then I thought to myself, well, especially when it started to get a little harder, I'm like, okay, well, do I want to risk sliding a little bit, from where I was? And that's a hard thing to do. I mean, you have a certain level of success, you don't want to have less.
Right.
So I started trying to ramp up my releases and get maybe like an extra book a year out or something, because that helps. And then that's when I started easing into some marketing. So,
how many books do you generally publish a year?
well, when I first started, I think I did 3. The first year I did 2. It was a half a year. And I rushed to get the second book out. It was funny because I kept reading, you have to get the next book, you have to get the next book up. And, my first book was selling so well, and I had no idea why. So every day I expected it to just drop off at first.
Right.
I'm like, every single day I'm like, okay, I sold, 200, 300 books yesterday. Today it's going to be 1, and I thought that. So I wrote the second book in a kind of I got to get this out because I got to try to nail this down and make this something less. And that actually lasted for maybe the first 3 books before I realized that I had some level of exposure and it wasn't going to vanish utterly and everything like that. So I did write a little quickly at first, and then I sort of slacked off a little bit, and I wrote maybe 3 books a year for a couple of years. But the last couple of years, I think I got 6 out this past year.
Oh, good. Very
including
good.
HarperCollins. Well, in January, the Funeral Games came out, and I'm going to try to do maybe at least that many next year. I have a couple series going, plus I have the new Voyager series. So I like to keep my series going and get something out to the readers before too much time goes by. But when you branch out and you have more than one series, that all of a sudden becomes a lot of work. So,
right.
But I find, and a lot of authors will probably disagree with me, that the faster I write a book, the better it is. And I just think it's tighter. My style of writing, I'm more focused and the story's fresher in my mind, what I've written already as I continue to go. And generally, when it takes me longer, it's because I'm struggling with it a little bit and it's not coming to me as easily. And I feel that those stories don't turn out as well. So, I like writing quickly. I enjoy getting books out, and, and the readers like it. So, I definitely get a book out at least every 2 months, and sometimes a little faster than that even.
There is something to be said for momentum. Sometimes it's just kind of like if you have to push a car. I think Josh and I have both pushed some cars out of the street in our time. If you have to push a car, it's a lot easier if you keep it moving. Once you got to start and stop and push it uphill, boy, so I think that's one of the advantages of writing quickly is you still have the story fresh. You still keep that enthusiasm. I remember in Stephen King's book, he talks about if you haven't finished it in the first 3 months, it's probably going to die because the enthusiasm is not going to last 180 days or whatever. Anyway, but everybody does it a little bit different,
Well, sure. Everybody's got their own way of doing things. And I'm not, I wouldn't try to tell anybody else how to do something. To me, the faster I get it done, like Duel in the Dark, I wrote in 6 weeks.
Wow.
Now, and then there's some editing and proofreading and everything after that. But my stuff doesn't, I don't usually have a heavy edit. My stories are pretty tight most of the time, and I'll do something stupid like use the wrong name or something like that, and editor will catch that, and they'll clean up some of the language. And my big problem is repetition. I'll remind the reader of something probably a little too much more often than I should, and my editor goes through and just slices those right out. So it's nice. To get to that, but that's just the way I am. It's the way I've always done things, and you can't fight yourself too much. So to tell someone just write more books, that might not be helpful advice for them.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't know how anybody writes a book over a year or 2. I know a lot of people do, and a lot of people write great books over that period of time. I'd forget everything that I'd done. I'd be bored with it, and I'd be ready to move on. So,
it's very interesting because we've had some people on the show that write prolifically. I think our record, I think Lori Starkey wrote 90 books in 18 months in her genre. So that's a lot. And then we have people who write 1 or 2, but it's different for everyone. And I don't know where I was going with that, but I'm sure I had a really good point.
How many words
How many words do you try to hit a day? Because
writing quickly and having a book done in 6 weeks, I can't do the math, but it's probably got to be
try to do 4,000 words a day.
4,000. Okay.
Yeah, because obviously you're not going to write every single day. I mean,
Right.
when I'm rushing to get something done, I do write every single day, but I try to do about 4,000 a day. That's a pretty comfortable number for me for like a good solid day's work.
And you said you don't do a lot of outlining, so I guess we kind of flip-flopped our show order, but so what's your writing process?
Well, when I started, it was just 100% making it up as I go along. I mean, that's, and I've been fighting that. You do something and it works for you, but, everybody wants to be something other than that they are sometimes. And I really want to have detailed outlines, but, like I'm writing the sequel to Duel in the Dark now, and these are my outlines here. I mean, they're just like notes scratched on a piece of paper. So, that's just the way I am. I try to get more organized, but then I feel like when I'm sitting down writing these outlines, the story is not all there for me yet. So it doesn't really work for me. So what would be a good outline for me is to sort of keep, 10 chapters ahead and write a little note of what I want to do in each chapter. And then just keep a decent list of the characters that I've created and notes about them, so I can refer back as, oh yeah, John's favorite color is blue or something like that, because I mentioned that in chapter 3 or something like that, and do that. But I don't do the outlining very well, but I want to. So I don't know what that says about me.
Frustrated outline writer. Best-selling novelist, but frustrated outline writer. There you go.
Yes. Do
you
use Word? Do you use Scrivener, or how do you put it all together?
I use Word. I use Word to do the manuscripts, and I used to format them myself, but now I have a formatter who does them for me. He's so reasonable on what he charges, and he's good, and he works with my craziness, so he'll get it back to me in a day.
Oh wow.
Which is great. We had that relationship, and I send him everything. So, and I've had him do a lot of work on my old books, reformatting them. So I've given, try to give him a lot of business, but he's very reliable, and he knows how I work, and I try to give him.
Would you mind sharing who it is, or can you? Do you think?
Well, somebody else referred him to me, so I'm not sure I should. But his name is Steph. And he lives in actually England. That's another thing. The internet. You talk about the internet. All of a sudden, I have a guy who formats my books, and he lives in England. Tom Edwards is in England too. So, all of a sudden you have these people. I have one of my proofreaders is actually in Guam.
Oh, very cool.
Believe it or not. So it's like the world got very small in the last however many years.
Oh yeah.
But, but I mean, that's, how you work. But but my formatter is great. So I send it off to him to do that. I do the print books myself. I have InDesign. It's Adobe InDesign. Which I know how to use. So I knew how to use it before. So that's a little leg up I have.
It's funny because you're our second guest in a row that has used InDesign, and that's not something that most people stumble upon casually, because I think it's it's not like just slapping something together in Word, if I understand correctly.
No, I mean, InDesign's what the publishers are using. It's a really professional grade tool, and it's expensive. I happen to have the Adobe Creative Suite on my computer already, so I didn't have to buy it. And I had used InDesign before I tried to do any of my own books. So, but it works really very, very well. And it lets you do a lot of things. Now, I don't think that I do my books maybe quite to the standard that a professional typesetter would do, because they'll look for a lot of things where like they just don't like the way, a line ends, or it looks clumsy on the page. So they'll tighten it up a little on one page or something like that. I don't really go to that level, but I think my print books come out looking pretty good, and I'm pretty happy with them. And I think they stand up to, professional publishers' books too. So I think that's important. I mean, if you can't do it, yourself, or you don't want to do it yourself, pay someone who knows how to really do a good professional job. Because like we were talking about before, 2012, 2013, you could get away with a lot.
Right.
But I think the best way you could hurt yourself, or the worst way, or whatever, you could hurt yourself in the market today, is to sort of give the impression of some level of amateurism. I think people forgave that in 2012, and it might have even been a weird kind of a plus then, because all these people that were early adopters for ebooks were like, well, we're getting this raw stuff right from these writers, and we're kind of like, but now you got a lot of people out there, indie, who've never gone near a publisher, and their stuff looks just as good as any publisher puts out, and it's well edited, and it's well proofread, and they have beautiful covers. And if you want to compete with that, you have to you have to look like that. I think the early days are gone. So
I'm
So
pretty
what
sure
would
you
be
could hire
your-
the exact same editor that they use in traditional publishing if you wanted to, because a lot of them do freelance work on the side.
it's funny. I do that with one of my editors
Sorry,
from Voyager. I'm one of the editors that I actually work with the editor who runs the imprint, but there was a junior editor there that I did a little work with too, and I really liked her. And she left to go back to get her MBA, and she does freelance work for me now. So and we get along really well, and it works very well. And I think you need that with an editor. You need someone you can get along with, and as a writer, I feel my stuff it doesn't need a heavy edit. I mean, obviously, if I screwed something up, if it's a bad story and you think it's a bad story, I want her to be honest with me. But
Absolutely.
I do find editors can sometimes it's an arbitrary change.
Yeah.
Editors can find some great stuff, and I'm all for having your books edited. But I think an author's got to have the backbone in dealing with an editor to say, yeah, you're right about that, or no, you're just making an arbitrary change on it. And to the credit of the editors I've worked with at Voyager and stuff, that's never a problem. I'll go back to them and I like these 8 changes that you made. I don't like these 2. And that's always been fine, And if you get somebody who's going to insist on their own arbitrary change, that's no better than an author who thinks every word that comes out of his keyboard is magic,
Exactly. So what would you think is if you were to give somebody starting out now a piece of advice, what do you think the number one piece of advice would be for that author?
Well, I would say one of the things is to pick a very tight subgenre. I think that's trying to look back as to what worked for me, even though it was easier then. You can't get more hardcore military science fiction than Marines. Okay, I mean, even the name,
right?
And and the cover I had was the same image on the cover. The cover is updated, but it's the same image on it. I think that helped me a lot because I especially think it helped me because that was a genre at the time that was relatively poorly served by the conventional publishing industry, I think. And I think you just had a lot of military science fiction fans prowling around on Amazon, anxious for books that they wanted to read. And I think that helped me because, it was what people were looking for. It was branded right. Everything about it screamed, military science fiction. And I think that helped me. I see a lot of people commenting on message boards and they're like, well, I have this idea for this, mishmash of a science fiction sort of romance, this, that, and a mix. And I just think that's harder to market. I'm not saying it wouldn't be a good book.
Right.
But if your book is screaming out to your target market that this is the kind of thing you're looking for, I think that puts you a leg up. And then of course there's all the road advice. Obviously, write the best book you can, get it edited, get a good cover if you can, spend the money if you can, and try to spend some money marketing because you're not going to have what I had where my first book could be in the top 20 for a year or more.
Right.
You're not going to get that today unless you're, Stephen King. I mean, it's just not going to happen. It's not even going to happen for him probably. It's just too hard to stay up there. There's too much competition now. So you really got to make a splash early. So, so try to market your first release and try to have your second release ready to go, no more than 2 months later, and maybe even quicker if you can. And if that means holding off and maybe getting a second book written, maybe think about doing that because there's still no marketing that does better than getting the next book in the series out. Nothing I've seen.
Yeah, that's what we've heard a lot of that too, and I have failed at that, which I want to do in my next series. But we have heard a lot of if you're going to do a 3-book series or a 4-book series, write the whole thing, and then kind of like what Lindsay Buroker did it with her series, where she wrote I think 6 in her Fallen Empire series, and she did 1, and then a month later she did the second one, and a month later she did the third one, and that kind of trickle. Algorithm catching for every book on every month kind of push it up the rankings a little bit. It's probably a good idea to do. Now, it's very hard to have the patience and the willpower to wait if you already have a published ready to go product sitting there on your computer. It's hard to wait, I guess.
It is hard to wait, but other than that, other thing I would say to people, I mean, Lindsay already was pretty established with her fantasy books, and I think there's a line where you hit a happy medium, and where that lies depends on how quickly you write. But I would not ever counsel anybody. I mean, maybe if you're just starting and you don't have anything and it's absolutely your first publication, but I would never counsel anybody who's got any level of exposure to disappear from the market for a year while they write 6 books.
Right.
You know, that I think would be, I wouldn't do that now. Even now, I mean, I've done, you know, I'm like, you know, I've sold a lot of books. I have a lot of fans. I get a lot of emails. I mean, I have a lot of advantages right now that someone starting out doesn't have. I would never disappear from the market for 8 months or a year without a release. I just,
because
to me, everything I've learned is that's the worst possible thing I could do.
Yeah.
Well, so depending on who you listen to, they say there's somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 books a day that are published. So if you took a year off, I mean, the chances of somebody finding, excuse me, a new favorite author are pretty high. So you really got to stay out there.
You know, I just think it's, I think I think books are kind of, I mean, in theory, a person's going to read a maximum number of books. Obviously, they only have so much time. They only have so much money they're going to spend on books. But with $4.99 ebooks, I don't think other authors are the biggest problem, in the sense that someone's going to buy their book so they won't buy yours. Like I just think it's getting the chance with them, getting the exposure.
Right.
If they read your book and they like it, that's great. But then if you disappear from a year, they have to find it again. They have lives. I mean, you know, I think it's easy sometimes for people, you know, to you're thinking about your books all the time, but even your biggest fan isn't thinking about your books all the time. They're thinking about, you know, work and family, and they're reading other books. If you vanish for too long, they may buy the book the instant they see it, but the question is, do they see it? And how long does it take them to see it? And I think that's the reason why the frequent releases really work, and they help a lot. So, you know, I would, that's the biggest piece of advice is, you know, try to write as quickly as you can. And, you know, maybe if you can get a good editor, that will help. You can write quicker, be a little less obsessed about getting every word perfect because you have somebody going over it, working with you, you know, or something like that. But I just think, you know, people who have a hard time writing quicker don't want to hear that, but it doesn't change the fact that I think it's your best route to success. But I wouldn't say disappear for a year and write 6 either. I mean, if you can do that, that's fine, but I wouldn't do that. But I'll tell you right now, is the Duel in the Dark sold very well, and I'm sorry I didn't have the second book, Called to Arms, ready a little sooner than I'm going to have it. It's going to be 2.5 months after, so that's not too bad. But I mean, I really would have been like throwing it on the right now, because Duel hit 60, but it's still around like 1,300 right now or something, which is not bad for 7 or 8 weeks out.
Right.
I'd love to have that new book out right now, you know, and if I could go back in time, you know, would I have waited a couple of weeks, you know, gotten some more jump on the second book and then release them a little more rapid fire? I would probably say yes. So, you know, that's something I think for authors to think about, is, you know, not disappearing from the market, but maybe trying to give yourself a chance. Obviously, I think it's more important to get book 2 out right away after book 1 than book 3 after book 2. Book 3 after book 2 is good too, but definitely get book 2 out quickly if you can.
Well, we're coming to the end of the hour. Is there any place, can you tell our viewers and listeners where people can find out about you and where they can find your books at?
Sure. My website is, I don't really have I'm working on a website now, having a website done for me, but I have websites for some of my series. But crimsonworlds.com is my first site that I set up for the Crimson World series, and wolfsclaw.com is the series for the site for my Far Stars series. Wolfclaw's the ship the heroes in the book have.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I couldn't believe that, frankly, that domain was available. Wolf's Claw didn't seem like something that would be available, but it was. So I grabbed it. But, you know, generally, of course, my books are all over Amazon. I've generally been widely distributed. So I've been available everywhere. I sold a lot of books on Barnes & Noble over the years. Recently, I moved a fair number of my books over to Kindle Unlimited, which I just think is a reality now for a lot of authors, particularly in my genre. I mean, there's a lot of exposure there, and Amazon has become very aggressive about saving all of its marketing for people who are exclusive. So, you know, it's just a marketing decision I had to make. I didn't really like doing it, because as much as I love Amazon, and I do, I have nothing negative to say about Amazon, but I had a lot of people who read me particularly on Barnes & Noble. I never really did very well on iBooks, which is what I guess really made it easier for me to switch to Amazon, because I was really only leaving one strong other market. But you know, that's something that I think people are gonna see more and more of. You get some people are dissatisfied with it, they leave, but I can say, from having both sides of the fence, you know, you get a lot more marketing from Amazon when you're in their whole ecosystem, and you can like it or not like it, but they're just the 50-ton gorilla in the market, and
that's the way it is.
I sell most of my books on Amazon, and I suspect for the foreseeable future, nothing's going to change that.
Yeah.
And even my Harper books, I sold 5 times as many ebooks as I did print books. So even though I sold thousands of print books in Barnes & Noble and in other stores, and some on Amazon, my revenue on that book and my royalties on that book came mostly from Amazon again. So it just is,
Do you have a Twitter or Facebook?
Yeah, Jay Allan Writes is my Twitter.
Jay Allan Writes.
My Facebook as well.
Okay.
And I don't do a lot on Facebook. So if people want to reach me, Twitter's a better way, or just an email, jay@jayallanbooks.com.
Okay.
And Allan's ALLAN. So people have trouble with that, and I don't normally care if people misspell it, but if you're trying to email me, you can't misspell it if you want if you want me to get the email. I do answer all my emails. Every once in a while, one might slip through me because I do get a lot of them. But it is I figure if people can read my book, I can answer their emails. So I always do that. And
awesome.
That's good.
Somewhere online, I picked up 2 physicists in my reading list that emailed me to correct my physics. But as I said, I'm an engineer by education, so I started with a little bit of physics. But I have some really a couple of smart people who come in and say, you're not really hitting this exactly right, and I'm like, okay, I'll try to fix that next time.
Nice. Well, Jay, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I'm really glad we got our technical problems out of the way for today's show.
Absolutely.
It's been great having you on. I really enjoyed it.
A lot of good advice and a lot of entertainment going on there.
Yeah. Everybody who watched live, thanks for coming and hanging out with us. If you're listening on the iTunes feed, thank you for listening. Be sure you like and subscribe to our channel. This has been Live with Jay Allan. I am Josh Hayes. That's my partner, Scott Moon. And we'll see you guys on the next show. Take it easy.